The topic I chose was stem cell research, particularly embryonic stem cell research, under the moral theory of virtue ethics. And this is about why I think it is permissible under these lenses. So before I can go into what stem cell research is, it's important to discuss what stem cells even are. According to the Mayo Clinic, stem cells are the body's raw materials, cells from which all other cells are generated. So this means that they are basically blank cells with the potential to become any sort of cell. With laboratory tech, you can divide stem cells to produce daughter cells. And if you don't know what daughter cells are, they are two genetically identical cells to the parent cell that they are from. These daughter cells can become new stem cells or specialized cells with a more specific function, such as blood cells. So here's a diagram showing a daughter cell either becoming more stem cells or specialized cells. My next slide is about stem cell research. Right now, this research is mostly theoretical. However, it is being highly looked into because of the potential that it has for the medical community and also future health. Stem cells have various capabilities, such as you can guide them to become more specific cells that can regenerate tissue. So if you get a really bad burn on your arm, you can use stem cells and guide them to become muscle cells to heal that tissue. By studying stem cells' growth into different cells, it can help with understanding how disease works. For instance, disease progression. So they think that with stem cells, you can find a cure for things like diabetes by looking at that progression. You can also study the effects of drugs on stem cells, which is much better than with humans. And they can also help identify new drugs. They can help people tolerate transplanted organs after a surgery because there's always the possibility of a body rejecting a new organ, and they believe that stem cells can help solve this. And even though this research is mostly theoretical, there have been applications of it. For instance, currently stem cell therapy is being used on patients with leukemia. So, contrary to belief, stem cells are not all embryonic stem cells. Stem cells can be found in small numbers in adult tissues. Stem cells can also be found in amniotic fluid. So when a pregnant woman gets an amniocentesis test, I think that's how you pronounce it, I probably butchered it though, the fluid extracted from that test contains stem cells. They also believe that you can engineer adult cells to become embryonic stem cells, but this is also a theoretical concept and we don't know all the implications of doing that. And of course you can get stem cells from embryos. So, embryonic stem cell research. Embryonic stem cells are obtained from early stage embryos. Eggs become fertilized in vitro fertilization clinics. The stem cells are extracted from the embryos, thus destroying them. And they are more durable and versatile than adult stem cells and can be manipulated easier. So people often ask, well, why use embryos at all? Like, when we have adult stem cells. And the reason is that your body might reject adult stem cells because they're older, they can't be manipulated as well as embryonic stem cells can. This topic has even come up in recent news. Under the Bush administration, federal funding for embryonic stem cell research was stopped. However, it was not stopped for adult stem cells. And during the Obama administration, federal funding was reinstalled for embryonic stem cell research. And because of this, there has been increased controversy in the topic. So, virtue ethics. Before I can get into the argument against and for embryonic stem cell research, it is important to define what virtue ethics is, as we will be seeing the arguments from those lenses. So this theory was coined by Aristotle. Virtue ethics is a broad term. It's person rather than action based. Instead of looking at the end result like utilitarianism, it looks at the virtues enacted during the process. Many philosophers, after Aristotle, looked at particular virtues like the cardinal virtues. And it is about being the best person you can be by forming good habits, which are virtues. So for this, I want to demonstrate, my argument is that you're still a virtuous person if you conduct embryonic stem cell research. A virtue is the mean between two actions or feelings. So an example is rashness and cowardice. Rashness and cowardice are two extremes, so they are not virtues. The virtue would be courage, since it is the middle point. And the virtues that I will particularly be looking at are justice, compassion, courage, resourcefulness, and moderation. And the reason I chose these specific virtues is because I looked at a study conducted, and it said that people in the medical profession believe that these virtues are the most important in their career. So obviously we'll be looking at those. So the ethical dilemma for the medical community concerning embryonic stem cell research is that as healthcare providers, there is a duty to alleviate pain. However, there is also a duty to protect human life, since those embryos will be destroyed in the process of extracting stem cells. So the first virtue is justice. Justice is giving others their due. It is between the extremes of selfishness and unselfishness. So arguments against embryonic stem cell research state that you're not fulfilling the role of justice because the embryo is a person and is not being given their due. This research is also expensive, so not everyone can afford it in the future. My counter-argument would be that even though embryos have the potential to latch onto the uterine lining and become a fetus, the embryos used in stem cell research will never be placed inside a woman. And the cost of this research also varies from person to person. And since embryos are made in a fertility clinic, they were about to be thrown away or they were donated. So therefore, there was no potential for those embryos to become a human in the first place. And concerning costs, long ago, certain surgeries that are less expensive now were very expensive because they were new and novel. So they think that the same thing is going to happen with stem cell research. Right now, it's very expensive, well, depending. But in the future, it might be less expensive because it's not new anymore. The next virtue I'll be looking at is compassion. Compassion is acting in the benefit of others. It is between the extremes of cruelty and egoism. So arguments against embryonic stem cell research say that you are not acting for the benefit of that potential person. It is essentially like taking organs from a baby. My counter-argument is that the intention of this research is not to harm other people. It is to benefit others' health, which is compassionate. And since that embryo will never be a person, you can't compare it to taking organs from a baby. None of these embryos were taken from inside a woman, so you're not stealing away any future. And one thing I've seen about this is the acorn argument, that every oak tree comes from an acorn, but not every acorn becomes a tree. It's similar to embryos. Embryos can become a baby, but not every embryo will become a baby. And also, this research is compassionate because it's meant to ease human suffering and promote human dignity. The next virtue that this enacts is resourcefulness. Resourcefulness is the virtue of out-of-the-box thinking. So arguments against embryonic stem cell research say that the research does not utilize resourcefulness because there are other ways to do stem cell therapy, such as using adult stem cells. The embryo is also destroyed in the process, which is not resourceful. My counter-argument is that each year, 1.7 million embryos are thrown away by fertility clinics. There's a growing concern on what to do with these embryos. Embryonic stem cell research is a creative way to ensure these embryos are being put to good use instead of being discarded. It is solving two problems in a good way, which is enacting resourcefulness. And also, there was a study done on mouse embryos, and they extracted stem cells without destroying the embryos. So they think that it might be possible in the future to take away stem cells from embryos and still keeping those embryos alive. The next virtue I'll be looking at is moderation. Moderation is the virtue of avoiding excess or extremes. Arguments against embryonic stem cell research say, well, why use embryos at all when there are various other ways to use stem cell research? It cannot be moderation if they are used in overabundance, which is a fair point. My counter-argument is that embryos are theoretically the safer option when using stem cells for treatment. However, adult stem cells and other stem cells are still used, so it is not solely embryonic stem cells. The next virtue I think you could enact if you're doing this research is courage. Courage is the virtue of facing extreme difficulties without fear. And I think the virtue of courage is enacted during embryonic stem cell research because it is a novel technique. In order to provide better care in the future, healthcare providers are using innovative techniques. So we can stay with the things we've been using, but we might miss all the potential cures that this research has. And even though new techniques bring some fear, these techniques are made to improve others' livelihood, so extra steps should be taken. So why is it important? Based on all the potential this research can have for helping human health, it is important to continue this research. Based on the multiple virtues that doing this research enacts, such as compassion, justice, resourcefulness, moderation, and courage, I believe it is okay to use embryonic stem cells from vitro fertilization clinics. We should encourage further research and support the application of this research in the future. And that is my presentation, and here are my sources.